This is the city, Louisville, Kentucky. Founded in 1778 by Colonel George Rogers Clark, this town on the falls of the Ohio River is an important river port and stopping place for settlers moving into the West. Louisville is a sprawling, thriving, lusty river town, part Midwestern, part backwoods, with a touch of New England uh, commercialism and European elegance. Hogs roam the streets. Drays creak up to the wharf where as many as 20 boats per day are unloading their wares. Louisville is a thriving commercial town. Factories, merchants, and wholesale grocers are doing booming business, and workmen can make as much as $2 per day. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad has opened south to all points. Louisville is the county seat of Jefferson County, Kentucky, and with a population of 68,000, it's the 12th largest city in the United States. But Kentucky is a divided state, and it tried to remain neutral in the opening days of the Civil War, but ultimately sided with the Union. In September of 1862, Kentucky is at war, and business in Louisville is at a standstill because of a Confederate invasion of the state. Merchants are moving their wares across the Ohio River to safety in Indiana. The Union Army of the Ohio, commanded by Don Carlos Buell, is racing north because Braxton Bragg and the Confederate Army of Tennessee has stolen a march on him. Newly recruited soldiers are pouring into Louisville and Cincinnati in response to this emergency. As Major General William Bull Nelson attempts to defend the city during this turmoil, he is not careful not to step on toes and bruise people's feelings. On September 29th, in the lobby of the Galt House Hotel, all of that will change. General Nelson was basically murdered in cold blood by a disgruntled subordinate. That's where I come in. I carry a badge. The story you are about to hear is true. The events and characters are real people. No names or circumstances have been changed. These are just the facts. I work homicide. My name is Girardi. At 7:30 a.m. on September 29th, in the Grand Hall of the Galt House Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, Brigadier General Jefferson Columbus Davis of the United States Army provoked a confrontation with his superior, Major General William Nelson of the United States Army, produced a pistol and shot him at point blank range with the pistol he borrowed from an accomplice. This event took place in full view of a number of witnesses, among whom were Kentucky Senator John Crittenden and Governor Oliver P. Morton of Indiana. Davis was immediately taken into custody and the weapon was recovered. He fully admitted the deed to Colonel Fry. General Nelson succumbed to his wounds within an hour of being shot. Now, what you have on the screen in front of you is the major crimes worksheet of the Chicago Police Department. I am a now retired Chicago police detective, 31 years of service, 25 working homicide. And during my career, I filled out several thousand of these, usually one or two per day, handling the shootings and violent crimes in the city of Chicago. What you see is a skeletal outline of the investigation, what the crime is, who the victim was, description of the injuries, medical, the offender, all the location, motive, even witnesses, etc. There's a lot of information there. And the summary, the narrative will be this presentation. But this is an official police department formula used every day by the Chicago Police Department. And it's in that backdrop that I'm going to talk about this case a little bit. First, we have to understand what happened. There's a murder. Why was there a murder? And what's the backdrop for it? How does it fit into the bigger picture of the Civil War? In the summer of 1862, Kentucky and the Union in general are in a state of turmoil. The Union war effort is not going well. Major General Don Carlos Buell, the commander of the Union Army of the Ohio, has allowed his Confederate opponents to steal a march on him. Buell had been operating against Chattanooga, and Braxton Bragg and Edmund Kirby Smith have launched a two-prong invasion into the state, forcing Buell to abandon his campaign and scramble back to defend Nashville and ultimately Kentucky. Losing Kentucky, according to Abraham Lincoln the year before, would be tantamount to losing the entire game. Now, the sanctity of Kentucky was again being threatened by this Confederate juggernaut. Buell's got some problems. He is not a favorite with the President of the United States. He is an old Army man, a devotee of George B. McClellan, and he has McClellan's views on how the war should be conducted. He is a soft war advocate. So that means don't hurt the enemy, but don't hurt them too much, and respect their private property. Buell's got a problem that he's a pro-slavery at worst, neutral on it at best, and he is not a favorite with the governors of the Midwestern states of Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. He's got all these things working against him. His opponent, Braxton Bragg, on the other hand, is hated by his army, but he is a good friend of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And he's got something that Buell lacks, which is a killer instinct. Bragg will go for your throat. He might not know what to do with you once he has you down, but he knows how to get you down. And he's also got support from Kirby Smith, who is operating independently from him and will ultimately fall under his control when they join. Kirby Smith is being slow in joining Bragg, however. The map shows you the two-pronged invasion. Kirby Smith coming through the Cumberland Mountains and Braxton Bragg moving north from the area of Chattanooga, making a move toward Nashville, which Buell wins, but then launching this two-pronged attack into Kentucky. As this invasion is unfolding, other things are happening in other theaters of the war. John Pope gets his butt kicked at the Second Battle of Bull Run on August 30th, and Robert E. Lee uses that victory as the opportunity to invade Maryland and bring the war to the northern states. As Lee does that, Confederate General Earl Van Dorn is moving against Corinth, Mississippi, trying to recapture that vital rail town. You can see that on the lower left-hand corner of the map. That's Van Dorn moving against Corinth. At the urging of the Midwestern state governors, Lincoln calls for 600,000 volunteers, and these new recruits are pouring into Louisville and Cincinnati without doing their usual time in the training camps. They're organizing and moving to the front where they will be armed, equipped, and trained. Lincoln uses the victory of McClellan at Antietam to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, and this infuses a political storm and a wave of desertions in the Union armies because the anti-slavery aspect of the war is not popular with many of the volunteers, especially in this region of the Midwest. Meantime, so there is a political as well as a military emergency unfolding in Kentucky. Confederates are rolling along like a juggernaut. They win victories at Richmond, Kentucky, at Munfordville. Braxton Bragg captures Bardstown and Frankfort, and he even installs a Confederate governor in the state of Kentucky. Meantime, as Buell is racing north, he entrusts the safety of Louisville to William Nelson, one of his most trusted subordinates, and the safety of Cincinnati to Major General Horatio Wright, who's the commander of the Department of the Ohio. Both generals are scrambling to form piecemeal defenses in their sector. So much is at stake as the game unfolds in Kentucky. And here, just to summarize some of those points, is a timeline. And in every single important investigation, it's necessary to put a timeline together so that you can pinpoint where certain people were at certain times and what the locations are. And that's especially helpful as a detective because sometimes where you were and what you were doing falls under question. But a detailed timeline shows you this whole avalanche of events that are occurring simultaneously. This is really a critical juncture of the war. And it's important to keep in mind that what happens here affects what's happening in another theater far away. Well, you can't have a murder without a victim. So today we'll talk a little bit about our victim, William Nelson. He's a native of Kentucky, born September 27th, 1824, in the town of Maysville. He attended Maysville Academy, and he was a student at Norwich University at the age of 13, like a lot of today's college kids. Well, they act like 13-year-olds anyway. When he was 16, he received an appointment as midshipman in the Navy by his congressman, and he became a career Navy man. He was a veteran of the Mexican War, rising to the rank of commander at the outbreak of the Civil War. Physically, Nelson was a giant, standing 6'4", well over 300 pounds, with a fiery temper. He was legendary in his use of profanity. According to one officer, quote, he was the best, finest, and most elegant original cursor in the entire army. He was a man of many accomplishments. He was a good friend, but he was a tyrant to his enemies and to those whom he viewed as being inefficient. His nickname of Bull was well earned. Because of his Kentucky origins, Nelson was sent there early in 1861 to ascertain the loyalty of the citizens of the state. Nelson reported to President Lincoln on the state of affairs and his fears that the state militia would ultimately side with the Confederacy. He was authorized by Lincoln to arm the loyal Kentuckians, and he was instrumental in smuggling 5,000 muskets into the state of Kentucky to arm pro-Union volunteers, whom he began recruiting. He was quickly rewarded. So here's a Navy commander, now commissioned brigadier general in the U.S. Army. And he distinguished himself in several small battles, like the Battle of Wildcat Mountain. If you ever go atop the mountain, you'll see the sign of the naval commander winning the battle on top of the mountain. Nelson was Don Carlos Buell's premier subordinate. It was his division that was first on the field at Shiloh after, after the first bad day for U.S. Grant. Nelson's division had been first into Nashville, capturing the first Confederate capital to fall, and he was slated to become corps commander in the Army of the Ohio. Buell had few more capable men than him, and Nelson was available for the command of the defenses of Louisville because on August 30th at the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, he'd been shot twice in the leg. So he was recovering from wounds, but he was in Louisville, and that was the hot spot at the moment. Now, as he's entrusted with the defense of this all-important river town, he has almost nothing to work with, except the local militia and these raw recruits that are pouring in on every road coming from the North States. He had little faith in the new recruits because he had seen them run at the Battle of Richmond. And here's a map of the Louisville defenses at the time. Nelson receives this command on September 14th, so just 2 weeks after being shot. He quickly improves the city's fortifications, and he restricts river traffic and the use of all bridges. He alarmed the citizens by declaring that he would burn the town down before he surrendered it. Meantime, Nelson begins organizing the raw recruits that are coming into town into regiments and brigades and divisions so that they can actually do something resembling army work. He's only too glad to get whatever help is offered. And so when Horatio Wright, who's doing similar activities in Cincinnati, sends Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis to assist Nelson, Nelson is gratified. He knows Davis. Davis is a regular Army man. He's encountered him both in Charleston Harbor and also during the Corinth campaign earlier in the year in the month of May. Davis is a division commander, and Nelson is not. They have a cordial relationship. They're not friends, but they're not enemies either. That's going to change. To Davis, Nelson gives the most important job there is right now. Take all this militia and craft them into something resembling an army that can at least stand up when in order when we need them to. By September 22nd, rumors of the Confederate advance are becoming more imminent and a state of emergency exists. Nelson gives an order ordering all women and children to prepare to leave the city, and he restricts the use of the Jeffersonville ferry to strictly military use. But Nelson has a problem now. Other than the emergency, he's hearing from members of his staff that the authority that he's given to Davis and the job is not being done. Instead of performing those actions, Davis is sitting in his hotel room and is openly criticizing Nelson's efforts to defend the city. Later that day, Nelson summons Jefferson Davis to his headquarters office in the Galt House for an accounting. The meeting is going to prove instrumental in the careers of both men. Late afternoon, in the first floor office being used by William Nelson, Jefferson Davis presents himself. And Nelson asks him, "Well, General, how are you coming along with your command?" And Davis gives him an answer that no boss wants to hear from one of his top subordinates. "I don't know." "Well," Nelson asks, "how many regiments do you have?" To which Davis answers, "I don't know." "Well, how many companies do you have?" Davis says, "I don't know." So now Nelson explodes. "Well, what the hell do you know?" Davis responded that he had about a brigade organized, which was almost ready for service, except it lacked arms. Nelson asks him again, "Well, how many men do you have?" And Davis says, "I don't know, about 2,500. Nelson wanted a specific answer, and this waffling by Davis is just too much, and he explodes. "But you should know, about 2,500 men? About 2,500? By God, you, a regular Army officer, come here and report to me about how many men you have? I selected you for this duty because you were an officer of the regular Army. But I find I have made a mistake. God damn you, sir. Don't you know, sir, you should furnish me with the exact number?" Well, Davis now took umbrage at this treatment, and he says, "I'm a regular Army officer, and you can't talk to me this way. I demand proper respect for my position. Call a witness into the room." And Nelson says, "Okay." And he calls his staff into the room. Now Davis says, "General, I didn't expect to get the guns now. I only wanted to learn if I could get them and where, and having learned the exact number, would draw them." But Nelson was not to be mollified. "About 2,500? By God, I suspend you from your command and order you to report to General Wright." Davis says, "I'm not leaving. You can't make me leave. You have no authority to do this." And Nelson raged, "The hell you won't. By God, I'll put you under arrest and send you out of the city under a provost guard. Leave my room, sir." Davis again says he won't leave, and Nelson turns to his aide and says, "If General Davis is not out of the city by 9 p.m. tonight, take him and put him across the Ohio River by force." Davis left. Bull Nelson did not like Indiana nor anyone from Indiana. In his opinion, Hoosiers were, quote, "the uncouth descendants of poor trash from the mountains of Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina." Nelson even disparaged his own brother, Tom, whom he said lost all his good manners when he moved to Indiana. Tom had a habit of putting his booted feet up on the mantelpiece, and Nelson did not like that. He had no high opinion of anybody from the state of Indiana, and another Union general, William Hazen, remembered that he never heard Nelson say any kind word of any person from Indiana. The mere mention of it was like sticking the red rag in front of the bull. At Richmond, Kentucky, on August 30th, raw Indiana recruits were routed after their commander, Indiana General Mahlon Manson, disobeyed Nelson's orders. 7,000 new recruits were routed and captured. Nelson censured Manson, accused him of stupidity, disobedience, and responsibility for the loss of 7 Indiana regiments. Nelson also cashiered another Indiana officer, Colonel Ebenezer Dumont, who surrendered an important supply depot to Kirby Smith at Lebanon Junction. A similar disaster occurred at Munfordville, where Indiana Colonel, you notice a theme here, John T. Wilder surrendered his post to Braxton Bragg, surrendering the Green River Bridge, which was then destroyed, putting the Louisville and Nashville Railroad out of commission for several months. Nelson was also familiar with the fall from grace of Brigadier General Lew Wallace from Indiana. Wallace had fallen into disrepute because of his alleged late arrival on the second day at the Battle of Shiloh. Nelson, who had come to Grant's relief, knew all about this and did not hold Wallace in high regard. When Horatio Wright assigned Wallace to assist in the defenses, Wallace presented himself at Lexington, where the local commander, Jeremiah Boyle, was his junior in rank, but Wallace surrendered rank and said he would serve under Boyle's authority. But when Nelson in Louisville heard of this, he ordered Wallace to return to Horatio Wright at Cincinnati. And in his autobiography, Lew Wallace writes that it can be doubted if General Nelson had ever read Chesterfield on the social amenities. He was only too glad to go back to Cincinnati. Well, with all of these actions, justified or not, against Indiana officers, Nelson had aroused the ire of Indiana Governor Oliver P. Morton, who was currently in Louisville. And Morton protected Indiana officers to the utmost of his ability. He restored Manson and Dumont to their respective roles and constantly irritated Nelson just by his presence in the Galt House Hotel. But now Nelson had another reason to detest all things Indiana: Jefferson, Columbus, Davis, another apparently useless Hoosier. Well, you cannot have a good murder or a good crime without an offender. And notice I say offender. In faraway places like New York and California, where they used to have police departments, they would call the offenders perpetrators. In the Midwest, especially in Chicago, we have a much more scientific term than the official offender, and the word that we use is bad guy. But regardless of what you call him, Jefferson Davis is the offender in this case. Let's have a word with him. He was born March 2nd, 1828. He was a volunteer in the 3rd Indiana during the Mexican War. And he so impressed his superiors that he was directly commissioned into the regular army as a lieutenant of artillery. Now, they tried to get him an appointment to West Point, but that slot had already been taken. So he got a direct commission into the army. And he served with distinction in the artillery in the pre-war army, and he was part of the garrison when Fort Sumter surrendered in April of 1861. After which, Davis was promoted to colonel, and he was present in Missouri during the opening days of fighting there at Wilson's Creek, and he was promoted to brigadier general in December of 1861, and he fought with his division in the Army of the Southwest at the Battle of Pea Ridge. After that, he went to Corinth, participated in the campaign against Corinth, and like everybody else in the Army that summer, he got sick from the bad water around Corinth, and he went home to Indiana to recover from his illness. During the crisis that was unfolding late that summer in Kentucky, Davis arose from his sickbed, presented himself to Horatio Wright in Cincinnati, and was assigned to Louisville to work under General Nelson, as we have seen. Physically, Davis is 5'7" and weighed a whopping 125 pounds. Although he was generally quiet in his demeanor, he could be, quote, aggressive, feisty, and confrontational, with a fiery and combative spirit. Davis had always resented the subordinate role that Nelson assigned him, and even his biographers admit that he took a lukewarm interest in that assigned task. This is unforgivable during this emergency. After being relieved by General Nelson, a furious Davis crossed the river at Jeffersonville. He was accompanied by General Stephen Burbridge, whom Nelson had also relieved of command. So you got these two disgruntled guys hating the same commander traveling together. That's good. That always works out well. Davis reports to General Wright in Cincinnati, and who tried to calm his temper. Davis took the opportunity, being basically out of service in Cincinnati, to communicate with Governor Morton of Indiana, and he even traveled there for a couple days. It's not known what transpired. There's no official record in any of the documents. But in any event, Davis has about a week to cool off, calm down, and return to duty. The emergency cools off just a little bit, excuse me, on September 25th, when the advance elements of Buell's army march into Louisville. Buell takes up his headquarters in the Galt House. There's no indication that he was aware of the difficulties between Nelson and Davis, but if he was, he undoubtedly would have sided with Nelson because Nelson was his go-to guy. Meantime, Jefferson Davis received permission from Horatio Wright to return to the Army. His division, in his absence when he got sick at Corinth, was being commanded by Robert Mitchell. And Davis now wants to come back and retake control of his division in Buell's army. Wright gives him permission to go to Louisville. The night of his arrival, September 28th, instead of reporting directly to General Buell, Davis goes to his division headquarters at Bluegrass Creek to effectually inform them he's coming and expect to see him in command so they could clean camp and do everything properly. By the time he gets back to the Galt House, it's too late to report to General Buell. Now, in the Civil War literature, here crops up this what if you can't have a good murder without a conspiracy theory that crops up somewhere. So this report that I'm going to summarize very, very briefly crops up about 40 years after the fact. Real time. That's what I love as a detective, a good timely witness account. Colonel Walter Whitaker of the 6th Kentucky supposedly told Dr. Anderson Ellis, a friend of Nelson's, that a group of Indiana officers were openly conspiring to provoke Nelson into a confrontation and then challenge him to a duel and kill him. By the person affronted would avenge himself upon Nelson. Ellis stated when he made this account 40 years into the future that he didn't believe that the threat was credible, and so he didn't bother to say anything about it. It's my professional opinion that he never should have bothered to say anything about it, because I think this is a perfect case of the further back in time something occurred, the much more clearly I remember it. I believe this is a fabrication, although some sources still speculate about it. Let's go to the scene of the crime. The Galt House Hotel, downtown Louisville. In the 19th century, it was the 19th century residence of Dr. W.C. Galt, hence the name. In 1834, the Galt House opened up as a hotel, and by 1835, it was a 60-room luxury hotel, the best place in the West for people to come. And everybody that was important, any dignitary, politician, general, other important celebrity, would come and stay and be seen at the Galt House. It was on 2nd and Main Street and within sight of the Ohio River. On the morning of September 29th, Instead of going directly to report to General Buell, General Davis goes to breakfast with an entourage, among whom is Governor Morton of Indiana. As this is happening, Nelson has just finished his own breakfast and he's at the front desk when Davis, accompanied by Governor Morton, approaches him. Now, in addition to Governor Morton, there at the second row center is Captain Thomas W. Gibson, Henry Villard of the New York Tribune, who happens to be a personal friend of President Lincoln, and Alf Burnett of the Cincinnati Press. Witnessing the event were Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky, his son, Thomas L. Crittenden, and the Galt House proprietor, Silas Miller. Buell's chief of staff, Colonel James Fry, and General Crittenden, and a host of other officers were either present or in immediately adjacent rooms. In front of this audience, Davis walks up to General Nelson and confronts him, demanding satisfaction or an apology for the affront that was given to him a week ago. Nelson is not aware that Davis is there until he gets his attention and he turns, and he's actually surprised to see Jefferson Davis, whom he had banished from the city, standing within a foot of him. And true to form, the mild-mannered Nelson says, "What are you doing here? Go away, you damn puppy. I don't want anything to do with you." And at this point, Davis reaches onto the counter, grabs a calling card from the top of the desk, crumples it in his hand, and throws it in General Nelson's face, publicly insulting a superior officer. Well, again, Nelson's calm temper is legendary, and so he responds as one might well imagine, with a backhanded slap into Davis's face, which sends Davis reeling backwards. Davis makes a fist and starts walking back toward Nelson, who says, "Go away from me, you cowardly son of a bitch," and slaps him in the face again. Nelson turns his back on Davis and starts walking out of the room. Davis says, "This is not the last of it. You will hear from me again." Now, as Nelson turns to walk away, he sees Governor Morton. And he says, "Oh, did you come here to see me insulted, sir?" And Morton says, Oh no, I'm just a witness. I was here with my friend. I just happened to be here. I'm an innocent politician." Well, according to Alf Burnett, who enters the room just after this slapping incident, he reports on October 3rd in the Morning Leader, the account of the murder. "Just at this juncture, I entered the office. The people congregated there were giving Nelson a wide berth. Recognizing the general, I said, 'Good morning.' At that time, I was not aware of what had just passed. His reply to me was, 'Did you hear that damned insolent scoundrel insult me, sir? I suppose he don't know me, sir. I'll teach him a lesson, sir.' During this time, he was retiring slowly toward the door leading to the ladies' sitting room." Burnett continues, "At this moment, I heard General Davis ask for a weapon, first of a gentleman who was standing near him, and then meeting Captain Gibson, who was just about to enter the dining room, he asked him if he had a pistol. Captain Gibson replied, 'I always carried the article,' and handed one to him, remarking as Davis walked toward Nelson, 'It's a Tranter trigger, sir, works light.' Nelson by this time had reached the hall and was evidently getting out of the way to avoid further difficulty. Davis's face was livid, and such a look of mingled indignation, mortification, and determination I never before beheld. His hand was slowly raised, and as Nelson advanced, Davis uttered one word, 'Halt!' and fired. The wounded Nelson The ball struck Nelson in the left chest just above the heart, and the general staggered out of the hall onto the stairwell and collapsed on the first floor landing. Now, I have 31 years of law enforcement experience, 25 of which I investigated murders and other violent crimes. And so, based on that, I stand here today and tell you that I accuse General Davis in the lobby with the revolver. And here's the revolver. The murder weapon is a Tranter pistol invented in 1856 by an Englishman named William Tranter. No coincidence there. The Tranter is an unusual gun because, unlike the pistols that we're used to with the single action, you have to cock the gun and then pull the trigger to fire it. The Tranter has a dual trigger mechanism. You see a trigger under the trigger guard and then inside another trigger. The Tranter pistol, you cock, and there's no hammer. You cock it by pulling that lower trigger, that cocks the gun, and then that interior trigger, the one that's protected by the trigger guard, is a hair trigger. The slightest touch will cause the gun to go off. Now, when Gibson handed the gun to Davis, we don't know if it was cocked or not. It really doesn't matter. Henry Villard wrote, I was just finishing breakfast in the hotel dining room on the ground floor when I heard the sound of a shot coming from the large entrance hall directly in front. I hurried out and learned to my horror that General Jefferson C. Davis had shot General Nelson with a revolver. Union General William B. Hazen wrote, I was in the hotel office when Nelson was shot. Hurrying towards the stairs where the firing took place, I met Davis, whom I had never seen before. He was in his shirt sleeves, without a hat, and greatly agitated. I at once seized him. He told me who he was, and I released him. Upon hearing the shot, General Thomas L. Crittenden ran out of the dining room. His father, the senator, called out, General Davis has just shot General Nelson. Crittenden ran up the stairs to the side of his fallen friend, who had been placed on the floor. Nelson, are you seriously hurt? Crittenden asked. Tom, I am murdered, Nelson replied. The wounded Nelson was carried to the room of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas C. James. Carrying the general were John Allen Crittenden, the senator's nephew, Lieutenant A.N. Ellis, and Colonel George T. Cotton. Nelson's friend, Tom Crittenden, and James Fry came to the room to monitor his condition. Nelson asked Silas Miller, the proprietor of the Galt House, to go get a minister. Send for a clergyman. I wish to be baptized. I have been basely murdered. Dr. Jeremiah Talbot came into the room, and the mortally wounded general spent his last moments being baptized and asking God for forgiveness. Dr. Robert Murray was the medical director of the Army of the Ohio. Dr. D.C. Cummins was Nelson's medical director, but he gave way when Murray came into the room. When Murray arrived, Nelson had just lost consciousness. I found him on the floor of his room, insensible, Murray wrote, with stertorous breathing and evidently dying from hemorrhage. The ball, a small one, and this is a Tranter bullet, about a 38 caliber, entered just above the heart and passed through that organ or the large vessels connected with it. I am quite sure that he did not utter an intelligible word after I saw him. Murray pronounced Nelson dead at 8:30, so within an hour of being shot. Colonel James Fry was a friend to both Davis and Nelson. He's currently chief of staff for General Buell. He had been under Davis's command before the war. He was also Buell's chief of staff. After witnessing the shooting and seeing Nelson's condition, Fry and an adjutant took Davis into custody in the name of General Buell, and they confined him to his room on the upper floor of the Galt House. As this was occurring, Davis told Fry that he wanted to relate the facts to him while they were still fresh in his mind. This is pre-Miranda, so these were the good old days. Davis freely admitted to Fry that he had shot Nelson. He said he did not come to the hotel with murder on his mind, but he fully intended to force an apology or, if rebuffed, to insult Nelson and demand satisfaction. Davis said that when Nelson slapped him after Davis threw the card in his face, honor demanded that he retaliate. He claimed that he obtained a pistol and it went off. Don't you hate when that happens? Every policeman knows that every murder suspect in his own mind is never to blame for a shooting. The gun always goes off. The offender may only want to threaten the victim or scare him or warn them when they're usually the ones that are at fault. The gun doesn't just go off. In this instance, even if it did just go off, it doesn't matter. Davis was kept under close confinement in his hotel room at the Galt House, but he was allowed visitors and some freedom of movement. Now, he tried to justify his actions to members of his own staff. And to this friendly audience, Davis gave a different account of what happened. He said that when he shot, he thought Nelson was going to get a gun if he didn't already have one. So here's a case of justifying the shooting for the alleged could be gun. I met him, Davis said, told him to defend himself, and shot him. I had to do it. I belong to the regular army, and not to resent an insult of that kind would have been to make me shunned by all my brother officers. I must either call him to account or be as the dog that sleeps beneath my father's floor. I regret the necessity, but could not have done otherwise. Well, wait a minute. Is this a little different than what he told Colonel Fry right after being arrested? And this is something else that always happens, often happens when an offender, bad guy, realizes that what he did doesn't seem so good. So you got to come up with a story that covers it or at least puts it in a better light. This happens a lot. And good policemen know that when the bad guys start to think, you have the advantage because they can't remember all the facts. And as they start changing details and concocting one scenario after another, their credibility goes south very quickly. Liars always change their stories. The truth doesn't change. It just is what it is, whether you like it or not. So we'll take a look at Jefferson Davis under close arrest in his room at the Galt House. His division, meantime, is still being commanded by Robert Mitchell. During his period of confinement, Davis writes to Horatio Wright in Cincinnati. Since my arrest, I have confined myself to everybody in Cook County jails there voluntarily, like Davis is here. He confined himself to his room and find my health is somewhat failing by it. Poor Davis. Davis is remanded to the civilian authorities on October 1st when the Army marched away. But no civilian charges were brought against Davis because it was understood that he would be tried by court-martial. The confusion is attributed to, quote, intervention of some sort. No formal military charges were ever brought against Jefferson Davis. Now, oddly, nobody detained, arrested, or tried to charge Captain Thomas W. Gibson for his part in the murder. While it is pure unsubstantiated speculation that Davis's companions had conspired to kill Nelson, there is no doubt whatsoever that it was Gibson who provided Davis with the murder weapon. Gibson was Davis's friend, he was a mentor and a confidant to Davis, and he was at hand when Davis needed him to arm him. Now, let's talk for a minute about Gibson. Gibson had a checkered past. He attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, but was expelled after he was caught setting one of the outbuildings on fire. They object to arson, apparently, at the U.S. Military Academy. After this expulsion, Gibson joins the United States Navy, and he has a propensity to engage in dueling, which is frowned upon by the Navy, and so he is forced uh, to quit the Navy. So uh, having established his character beyond a reasonable doubt, he took the one position in life that he was best suited for. He became an attorney. He was also captain of the Louisville militia, and he had been Davis's commander during the Mexican War. Now, the fact that Davis asked for a gun, Davis did not have a gun during the confrontation with Nelson. They had their confrontation. Davis asks for a gun and is given a gun by Captain Gibson. That makes what happened to Nelson a premeditated murder, a first degree murder, not a second degree murder or manslaughter or anything else. It was planned and it was executed. Because he provided the weapon to Davis, Gibson is equally accountable and equally guilty of committing that murder. He was never charged with anything, nor even questioned about it. Is there doubt of Gibson's guilt? Well, this is what he wrote in his diary on the afternoon of September 29th. This morning, Jeff C. Davis killed Nelson with my tractor pistol. I knew Nelson well, and socially, I liked him, but he deserved his fate. And the verdict of the community is unanimous that Davis was right. Davis is under military arrest in his room at the Galt House. Well, many people weren't sure what happened because the rumors were flying, and so there were many different accounts of what happened. That's why you interview witnesses independently of each other so that they don't remember what somebody else saw. Most accounts failed to mention that Davis had thrown a wadded calling card into Nelson's face, making him, not Nelson, the aggressor. That's why, again, that's why we interview witnesses differently. In the aftermath of this shooting, General James S. Jackson and William R. Terrell gathered in front of the Galt House and demanded that Davis be hanged on the spot. They created such a disturbance that a detachment of the 85th Illinois was called from its camps to surround the Galt House and seal off all the military camps. All soldiers were confined to their camps. Jackson and Terrell both vowed vengeance against Jefferson Davis, but both of them were killed in action a week later at the Battle of Perryville. Meantime, Brigadier General Jeremiah Boyle, another friend of Nelson, observed Governor Morton in the lobby of the Galt Hotel, confronted him, accused him of being an accomplice to the murder, and punched him in the nose. Nothing happened to General Boyle either. If anybody on planet Earth envied General Bull Nelson on September 29th, it was General Don Carlos Buell. Not only had he just lost a veteran corps commander who, and trusted subordinate in his army, he also lost a proven field commander, Jefferson Davis, who was in custody for killing the corps commander. To add to his woes, just within a half an hour of the murder transpiring, Buell receives a telegram from the War Department in Washington. They finally decided to act on the urgings of Governor Morton and Richard Yates and other governors in the Midwest to replace Buell. And the order came for Buell to stand down and turn over command of the Army of the Ohio to George Henry Thomas. Well, most of the day was wasted with telegraphs going back and forth because Thomas declined to take the command, deeming it to be imprudent during an active military campaign. You don't change commanders in midstream. It was bad form. And so Thomas refused, and all day long, a flurry of telegrams were going back and forth between Louisville and Washington, D.C. In the meantime, no formal charges were brought against Davis. No formal investigation was initiated. No witness statements were recorded at the time. Instead, Buell issued a statement praising Nelson, but failing to mention the circumstances of his death. No investigation that even an incompetent policeman would have done at a crime scene like this was conducted at all. The Army just dropped the ball in the chaos of that day. September 30th was spent for Nelson to lay in state and be buried. It was not until October 3rd that Buell finally telegraphed Washington informing them that Davis was under arrest for Nelson's murder and asking that Davis be tried by court martial because right now he was too busy finally getting around to conducting military operations. Nelson's body lay in state in the Galt House until 3 p.m. on September 30th, after which he was moved to the church. He was furnished with an elegant rosewood coffin mounted with silver, and his divisional flag that he had carried onto the battlefield at Shiloh was draped over the coffin. And so this full pomp military funeral is going forward. The Reverend Newell and Lang read the Episcopal burial service, and then Reverend Talbot delivered the eulogy. The general is dead. Let us remember his virtues and emulate them. Let us forget his faults and bury them. Reaction to this murder was mixed. John Pope, Union general, despised Nelson, and he wrote this: "The only surprise felt by those who knew him was that some such fate had not befallen him before. He was the most tyrannical, arrogant, and abusive officer that I ever saw. He did not appear to make any effort to control his virulent temper. It is impossible that he could have long avoided a violent end at the hands of some victim of his wrath." William B. Hazen wrote, "I knew Nelson only as a kind and genial gentleman. As a soldier, he was vigilant and painstaking to the last degree. But at times, he was very harsh and petulant." William T. Sherman, in a letter home to his wife, wrote, "What a sad thing was Nelson's fate. He was a clever fellow, but overbearing and blustering. Davis, on the contrary, was a modest, bashful, quiet, but brave man. I cannot justify the act, but do not condemn it." William Passmore Carlin wrote, "Nelson was a man of great power over men, active, aggressive, and intelligent. He had the reputation of being overbearing and rough in his treatment toward subordinates. His death was a positive loss to the Union cause and Kentucky." And Richard Johnson wrote, "I knew Nelson well. He was a man of energy, nerve, and ability, and his loss was a severe blow to our army, as true and tried men were scarce in the bleak, dark days of the rebellion." Well, that was the high command. What about the rank and file? Members of the 6th Kentucky quickly made a pledge to kill Jefferson Davis on sight. But members of the 8th Kentucky were glad that a tyrant of the first water had been killed. When they heard the news, the rank and file of the 105th Ohio broke out in cheers. R.V. Marshall of the 22nd Indiana wrote, "Every man in the 22nd deeply sympathized with General Davis and believed him fully justified in the course that he pursued." In his diary, Daniel Howe of the 79th Indiana wrote, "General Nelson shot by Jeff C. Davis at Galt House. Great rejoicing among the soldiers and citizens." A.T. Corbin of the 9th Ohio wrote, "General Nelson was shot yesterday by General Davis of Indiana, and it is the best thing that has happened in this department. He was shot and repented and was baptized and went to heaven in about 20 minutes. But I have my doubts about him getting there." Levi Ross, one of Nelson's men, however, wrote that the provocation was trivial and without the shadow of justice. But the cynical Ross predicted the future. "Davis will probably go scot-free, unwhipped of justice, because he wears a star." The Battle of Perryville was fought on October 8th without Nelson or Davis. Although the Federals won the battle, it was badly mismanaged. Bragg was able to retreat to safety, and Buell came under another deluge of criticism. Davis was released from custody without charges on October 13th. After 2 weeks of duty in the defenses of Cincinnati, he was restored to command of his division on October 21st. A variety of circumstances led to his release. First, the failure to bring formal charges. Under the Articles of War, formal charges against an officer must be brought within 8 days. This was not done. General Horatio Wright was instrumental in this breakdown. It was he who ordered Davis to be released from custody. Wright justified the release on the fact that no charges had been officially filed. Furthermore, he claimed that Davis had acted in self defense and that Buell shared this view. This was patently untrue, but Wright was the local commander. He wrote, I was satisfied that Davis acted purely on the defensive in this unfortunate affair, and I presumed that Buell held very similar views, as he took no action in the matter after placing him in arrest. Wright was a crony of Davis's and deliberately distorted the facts. Don Carlos Buell had notified Washington, D.C. by telegraph of the murder on October 3rd and requested that Davis be tried by court martial in Washington, as the emergency in Kentucky precluded him from handling the court martial. Now, this can be construed as an intent to both bring charges and conduct the military trial, though technically those charges were never filed. But this is something for lawyers to argue over in court and not in the heat of battle. Nothing happened because the Battle of Perryville quickly followed these events. As for the self defense argument, many people felt Davis was justified to retaliate for a public affront without realizing that he himself was the aggressor. But nothing that did happen justified the release without charging of Jefferson Davis. Bull Nelson was wronged by Wright. General Richard Johnson wrote, though Davis was aggrieved, it is difficult to see how he can be justified in provoking the final quarrel and committing the foul deed of death. The facts will not sustain the theory of self-defense, and the military law, as he well knew, offered prompt and ample redress for all the wrong Nelson had done him at their first meeting. But he made no appeal to law. On the contrary, he deliberately took all law into his own hands. The other reason was this man, Governor of Indiana, Oliver Hazard Perry Throckmorton, called by some the Deputy President of the West. He vigorously guarded all of Indiana's officers in military affairs from all critics, like a godfather. Morton was one of the staunchest of the war governors, called by his Democratic opponents, quote, a dictator and an underhanded mobster. He was aggressive, violent, unscrupulous, prejudiced, and utterly unyielding. He was radically and violently pro-union, and he was a fanatical abolitionist. During Indiana's internal turmoil in 1862, he disbanded the General Assembly, called out the state militia, and borrowed money from the federal government to pay state debts. The good old days. Morton regarded Kentucky governors Beriah Magoffin and later Dick Robinson as traitors, and as a result, he constantly meddled in Kentucky's political affairs. Morton detested Don Carlos Buell and felt he was not conducting the war as it needed to be fought, and he consistently lobbied to have Buell ousted in favor of somebody who would fight. Morton acted as if all of Indiana's troops were under his direct control, even after being assigned to the various armies. Immediately after the murder, Morton visited Lincoln at the White House in Washington and had several private audiences with him. Morton claimed the trip was in reference to seeing about getting Indiana POWs exchanged. Buell wanted justice done and complained that the seeds of mischief, always present in Morton's extra-official conduct towards Indiana troops, were now being sown with a vigorous but craft hand in the councils at Washington. It is not known what happened in the meetings between Lincoln and Morton. Lincoln knew about the murder because John Crittenden had telegraphed him from the Galt House just after it happened on September 29th. Lincoln valued Nelson and lamented his loss. Nelson had been instrumental in saving Kentucky in 1861, but Lincoln needed to save Kentucky in 1862. Nelson was dead and nobody was going to bring him back. Lincoln is not known to have directly interfered with this case, but during his visit, Governor Morton made a rousing speech in favor of the Emancipation Proclamation before leaving Washington. As a result of Morton's visit, Davis retained James Speed, a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, as his attorney. Whether by intent or design, justice took a back seat to political expediency. On Thursday, October 23rd, Chase wrote to Abraham Lincoln. Chase is the Secretary of the Treasury. Excuse me. Under no circumstances whatever can personal violence by one officer to another be passed over without the arrest and trial of the offender, except at the cost of serious detriment to the service and serious injury to the respect due you as Commander in Chief. These circumstances, I think, imperatively demand a court martial. Under the common law, the act is murder. Under our law, manslaughter. Under both, a crime. Chase reminded Lincoln of Davis's contribution to the cause. Can it be that the affair is to be passed over as an ordinary and insignificant occurrence, like most of the murders on the south side of Chicago? Gideon Welles, Secretary of the U.S. Navy, recorded in his diary what transpired during a cabinet meeting on October 24th. Quote, some discussion was had in regard to the course which should be pursued towards General Jeff C. Davis, who killed Major General Nelson. The grand jury, it is reported, have ignored the bill in the civil case. The question was whether the military ought to take notice of the homicide after the civil authorities declined. Chase and Blair thought the military should. Seward thought the affair might be looked into. I remarked that if the transaction had occurred in the Navy, we should at least have had a court of inquiry. The cabinet took a wait-and-see stance on the matter. Lincoln did not make any comment that anybody recorded. Presidents usually don't speak out on murder cases. Interestingly, now this says 23rd and 24th October, on the 18th of October, a correspondent of the Cleveland Morning Leader wrote, by the by, General Jeff C. Davis is at the Galt House, and if under arrest, is not guarded. It is impossible to learn anything about the matter, as for some reason or other, the people here studiously avoid all talk upon the subject. Why this is, I know not. But the clamor for justice did not go away, not in Louisville anyway. Welles had been misinformed. When the civil authorities saw that the Army wasn't going to do anything, they finally took action. Jefferson Davis was indicted for manslaughter in the Jefferson County Courthouse on October 27, 1862. He was released on a $5,000 cash bond, which was put up by Captain Thomas W. Gibson. Governor Morton was ordered to be available for testimony if needed, and this delayed the governor making a second trip to Washington. Davis's attorney was James Speed, who would be named Lincoln's Attorney General in December of 1864. But this was the wrong charge, the manslaughter, and introduced in the wrong court. According to Article 9 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, quote, any officer or soldier who shall strike his superior officer or draw or lift up any weapon or offer any violence against him, being in the execution of his office, on any pretense whatsoever, or shall disobey any lawful command of this superior officer, shall suffer death or other punishment as shall, according to the nature of the offense, be inflicted upon him by the sentence of court-martial. In the Jefferson County Courthouse on May 24, 1864, after numerous continuances, a final disposition was made in the matter of manslaughter against Jefferson C. Davis for the fatal shooting of William Nelson. In a moment, the results of that hearing. One can only wonder the outcome of the Battle of Perryville had Bull Nelson and Jeff Davis been commanding their troops. Instead, Nelson's corps was commanded by Charles Gilbert. Gilbert had been appointed to temporary corps command by Horatio Wright. He was officially a captain by rank, and his elevation to Major General was never approved by the U.S. Senate. During the Battle of Perryville, Gilbert refused to send his men into battle without orders from Buell, who was not even aware that the battle was being fought because of an acoustic shadow. Jefferson Davis's division was commanded by Robert Mitchell, who sent his troops into the fight, but Gilbert stymied his aggressive attack and refused to give him reinforcements. After Perryville, Gilbert resumed his former rank and was assigned to mostly clerical work. Mitchell remained in the Army, although after the Battle of Chickamauga, he was sent to the districts of North Kansas and Nebraska. On October 24th, Major General William Stark Rosecrans replaced Buell in command of what would henceforth be called the Army of the Cumberland. Rosecrans had defeated Earl Van Dorn at Corinth on October 3rd and 4th. His move took him out from under the thumb of U.S. Grant. It also gave the Union two fighting generals in the Western Theater. Buell was out of the war. McClellan followed him on November 7th, replaced by Ambrose E. Burnside. The nature of the war had changed. Jefferson C. Davis remained in the Army, probably because he had the one quality that had been lacking in Buell, McClellan, and Gilbert. He was demonstrably willing and able to kill, hopefully more of the enemy than his own side, but he eventually rose to the rank of Corps Commander under William T. Sherman with the brevet rank of Major General. But although he remained in the Army for the rest of his life, he never rose any higher. According to one writer, perhaps the administration felt about him that he ought to be thankful for anything short of hanging. Controversy was never far from Davis's doorstep, as witnessed on December 9, 1864, when he stranded hundreds of freed slaves that were following Sherman's army to the mercy of Confederate cavalry at Ebenezer Creek. Once again, Davis was protected by his superiors. He was apparently made of Teflon. Governor Morton of Indiana continued in politics, serving 2 terms in the United States Senate. Today, he is honored by a fine monument in front of Indiana's Capitol in downtown Indianapolis. He also has a striking marker over his grave in Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. Across the road in the cemetery is this marker for Jefferson C. Davis, who ironically died in a posh hotel in Chicago, the Palmer House, in 1879. The inscription on this marker reads, "His memory is embalmed with the history of his country." This is the headstone for William Nelson in his hometown cemetery at Maysville. Nelson's body was removed twice, first from Louisville Cemetery to Camp Nelson, which had been named in his honor, and then back home to Maysville. After the war, when Kentucky became a Confederate state, the state legislature refused to appropriate funds for a public monument to him. This is a sad memorial for a man who deserves better treatment from history and memory than he has received. After numerous continuances, the case against Jefferson Davis was dismissed with leave to reinstate. Jefferson C. Davis was free and clear. James Speed's expertise, coupled with Governor Morton's political clout, was enough to suppress the manslaughter indictment. Don Carlos Buell later wrote, quote, "Thus the military authority of the government was abased over the grave of a high officer, whose slaughter by another officer under such circumstances and as a purely military offense, it had not the character to bring to trial." Although it was rumored later that Davis received a pardon from the governor of Kentucky, there is no record of this. After the war, when compiling a report of his Civil War service, Jefferson C. Davis referred to the incident only in passing and with his impeccable selective memory. This is what he wrote. "General Wright assigned me to duty with Major General Nelson, commanding the troops for the defense of Louisville. On the arrival of my division with Buell's army, I assumed command of it. But a few days after, a personal difficulty with General Nelson caused my arrest. And again, General Mitchell assumed command. That's all he said about it. He never once, for the rest of his life, made any mention that showed remorse, regret, or sorrow for what had happened. Of course, it helps if you have friends in high places. Nobody has accused President Lincoln of actively interfering in the case. But if you commit a murder, it's probably not the unluckiest fortune to have a president, a governor, an attorney general, and other dignitaries on your side, especially when the newspapers support you and give you carte blanche in their efforts to justify your misdeeds. Thank God in today's day and age, there's nothing of that nature that ever happens, especially not in the press. This was a true story.